Hello and welcome to another bonus episode of the Mouthy Money podcast. We've actually got two in a row for the bonus episodes because we are working through some guests who had some slight delays last week, but that's fine. That's not a problem. I'm joined again by my MRN colleague, Chris Tuite. Chris, welcome back.
Oh yeah, to everyone. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, good, thank you. Now, today's bonus episode, we're going to follow a similar sort of format to what we did last week. You're going to let me kick off with a little bit something a little bit ranty. I was going to basically just lay that out there straight away.
I'm not going to stand in your way if you want to have a rant, Ed. You far away.
I'm gonna try and keep it as convivial as possible without getting too ranty. But the thing I wanted to start us off on, and it's going to lead into basically everything else we're going to chat about on this brisk episode, and that is the content of my column last week, which I actually wrote about the concept of financial repression. Now, financial repression is quite scary sounding.
It sounds dark. I'm not going to lie. It does sound dark. It sounds sort of, totalitarian in some degree.
It's but it is quite a specific thing, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it, and this will kind of run to what we're going to talk about later on. We're going to talk about tax, which I really loves to talk about. Is because we find ourselves in a position where we've got the general election going on, and we have the kind of two main parties talking about their plans for the economy and taxation and spending and all this kind of stuff. And actually, what happened last week, which came from a sort of a place where you wouldn't necessarily expect it, but I saw, of all people, the doyen of personal finance media, Martin Lewis, taking to task Jonathan Ashworth, who is a Labour spokesperson on, I can't remember what his shadow minister of. His shadow minister something to do with money, basically. And he had a bit of a go at Jonathan Ashworth, basically saying, you've ruled out tax rises, you've ruled out spending law, you've ruled out cutting spending. What are your plans? Because this is a kind of a fantasy act. And I thought it was a really interesting remark, and it's something that Martin Lewis, he does this kind of Wednesday morning, Good Morning Britain bit, but he doesn't tend to wade in heavily into politics in that sort of way. And I thought I would try and answer the question as to what they're going to do, because they're not going to spend more money, apparently. They're not going to cut the budgets, apparently. They're not going to tax people more, apparently. So what do you do? What do you do in that circumstance, right? And this goes for Labour as well as Tories, because I think, broadly they're going to be doing similar sorts of things. You reach for a tool called financial repression. So I'm going to keep my explanation of what financial repression is really quick as I can, because I don't want your eyes to glaze over too badly, Chris.
No, they're not glazing over. They're intrigued.
Listening intently.
I am. Yeah, I might learn something.
So financial repression, to put it in a nutshell, is where you basically make the government debt look smaller relative to everything else in the economy, make it more manageable. And you do this by basically, and they did this after the Second World War, so there's a good precedent for this. You let inflation run a little bit higher than it probably should. And this was easier for them back then because there wasn't any central bank independence. So you let it run at like 4% a year or something like that. Meanwhile, you prevent people from holding overseas assets. So you force like pensioners and anyone who's an investor of any kind to hold UK-based assets, which are priced in pounds. So what you're doing there is you are devaluing, you're forcing everybody to hold local assets, and then you're devaluing those assets, which are government debt, the government's debt pile, basically, by letting inflation run hot. And that achieves the aim of using inflation as a form of taxation. It's a backdoor way of doing it, so you're not putting people's taxes up, and then you are getting the deficit and the debt levels look smaller relative to tax take, which goes up with inflation because wages go up with inflation. So basically, that's it. That's my theory.
Ingenious. So does that mean we're all going to get a Brit ISA at gunpoint? Someone's going to come around and this is your state-sponsored investment vehicle. You must only invest in, UK-based companies.
You just, Chris, but it is already happening. So the government is already pushing pension funds, big pension funds, to invest more of their capital into UK-based assets.
Right.
It's not at gunpoint or at the point of legislation yet, but I think things are moving in that direction already.
Be gently persuaded or not so gently persuaded? Or we don't know.
They're being given a kind of a firm talking to, I think, at this I'd say we're at this point. And now there is the one side to this is it's more difficult for the government to let inflation run hot these days because they don't have control of the Bank of England. But there are ways of doing it that include things like guaranteeing loans to businesses and consumers and that kind of thing, stuff that we did during the pandemic that helped generate more inflation. There are backdoor ways to do it. You get rid of the governor, put someone in place who's more relaxed. You could even change the Bank of England inflation target to let inflation run hotter, which is something that has been talked about.
Yes, I've had clients talk about this as an idea as well, but I thought it was just making it a more realistic target. But you think this is to give leeway to turn the heat up, is it?
This is about as close to a conspiracy theory as I get in anything.
Hang on, my tinfoil hat's here somewhere. Keep talking. Yeah.
I genuinely think this is something that they don't talk about, but is like a realistic option that is on the table somewhere. And I think we're going to see more of it, whichever government comes in. We can have this conversation again in 5 years and see whether I was right. But
no, I do think there's something in it. I mean, if you're not going to do anything, you have to be doing something, right? You can't just sit here and say, we're going to do the same old. That just makes no sense whatsoever. So there has to be a plan there.
So let's use this really complicated, convoluted way of doing it that we've used before, that nobody understands and nobody will be able to get their head around before it's all happened. The corollary to all this is the worst people who are going to be worst affected are people who hold lots of UK government debt, and that's going to be pensioners, which politically as well is something that I would argue the Labour Party in particular are probably more relaxed about, given their kind of voting bases and that kind of thing. So we'll see. I think it'll be interesting. But yeah, this runs into the tax thing, which I know you wanted to talk about next, because it's using the tax system and, tools at the disposal of government to manipulate outcomes and that kind of thing, which I know is something you're very interested in, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Is that a stealth tax? It's not a tax, is it?
Inflation is a form of taxation. It is a form of tax, but it's not we are imposing this sort of tax, but it is considered a form of taxation. Yes, it's taxation on cash.
Interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see the logic of that, and it worked, right? From World War II, didn't it? Because of the huge debt, because of the. I mean, obviously there was the loans from to America that took years and years to pay off, but it was paid off. The debts were paid off quicker as a result of this, weren't they? So, that's. I mean, it makes sense. I don't know how bad we are relative to the Second World War. I presume not as bad. Obviously, things have changed in terms of how we measure success in 2024 versus how we did in 1945. But if the principles are workable, I can see why, based on what you said there, it would potentially work. I think the key thing, though, is that we are potentially more informed these days. There are some moving parts that you talked about with regards to an independent governor, which would be political in terms of trying to sort that out. I don't know how many people would be on, sort of general voters would be upset on the man and woman on the street would be about that. But actually, we'd notice it, I think, in our world, and it would create some kind of pushback. I think the general thing is that, and this is sort of to the wider tax point, there's been a lot of chat about tax, obviously, with one of the debates Rishi and Keir Starmer had, and this £2,000 figure, which related to a wider 38 billion figure, which I think has been somewhat discredited since then, if I'm reading my fact-checking websites correctly. I think, zooming out, there are just some areas where the tax system just doesn't feel, well, worst case scenario, fair. It doesn't feel like it's taxing the right people the right amount. And best case scenario, I suppose, it just feels like it's sort of evolved past its purpose. As inflation has driven the cost of everything up, the tax system's been a bit slow to follow. So if we're giving the guys at HMRC the benefit of the doubt, you could say, well, actually, and the government, I suppose, although, I'm loath to do that at times, we could give them a bit of credit and say, oh, it takes a bit of time to readjust these types of things. But I think there is a sense for me anyway that the table is moved around, everything on the table is moved around. The tax system still has a little bit of catching up to do, whether that's accidentally or by design.
I think you're being generous then. I think the tax code is an absolute mess, really. And I think the thing that I always I think a lot of people who are kind of proponents of simplification, and I would certainly say, is the more complicated you make the system, the more you create kind of perverse outcomes. And this is like, we just saw in the news today, Labour have dropped their thing about reinstating the lifetime allowance. And whatever you think about, having a lifetime allowance on the amount of pension money you can earn, whatever you think of that, having a lifetime allowance on the amount you can put in the pension created the perverse outcome that we had a shortage of doctors of senior doctors in the NHS because it's not worth their while to continue working. That is a perverse outcome. And then you have things like inheritance tax, which again we talked about a lot, and it's so complicated that it means that people who can afford to pay for the right kind of advice are not paying it, and the ones who are paying it are the ones who are caught in the middle, who had no idea that they would end up getting caught out by inheritance tax. And it's the complexity of the system. And this one of the ideas that I saw about inheritance tax that actually I thought very interesting was actually, instead of getting rid of inheritance tax, what you do is you lower the rate at which it's paid, you lower the thresholds, but instead of making it 40%, you make it 10% on everything over 100,000. So you do two things. You get rid of all of the allowances and gifts and all this kind of stuff that makes it mad and generates an entire tax planning industry, and you simplify it to, your first 100 grand is free, then you get 10% tax on top of everything else. And by doing that, you simplify it so people know the rules and the thresholds. It's very easy to understand. And you also set it at a low enough level that people are not that bothered about trying to avoid paying it. And actually, you can improve outcomes that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting. The Sunday Times covered this in depth actually this weekend, I'm to say, and Lily Russell-Jones in particular did a piece that I thought was really interesting, looking at IHT through the prism of sort of some real cases, and it doesn't seem to be fit for purpose. Like you said, I think people who probably shouldn't be paying it are, and the people at the top end of the spectrum are able to find ways around it, which means that they're not, which means that inherently, I think it represents just shy of 1% of what the HMRC put in. There is just a feeling that it's now only affecting hardworking households as opposed to the wealthiest people that it was potentially aimed at initially, which is, and trying to redistribute the wealth around that way. And actually those people are able to, like you say, find ways around it, create different vehicles, use all the tax advice under the sun to get through it. And then it's, you people who have worked hard their whole lives have had kind of the benefit of house price inflation. Obviously there's been benefits with that, but obviously you kind of get to the end of it and you're caught up in this tax trap, which fundamentally feels designed for somebody else, but you end up carrying the can for. And that sense of unintended outcome, as you mentioned, or did you say perverse outcome, Ed? Sorry.
Yeah, I did, because I was being polemical, so I said perverse.
There you go. But no, there is, it's like unintended consequence or perverse outcome, wherever you want to play it, where it's just like, this isn't working. Like many things, there is a sense that there's a lot of stuff that isn't working in the UK at the moment, particularly around, as you say, the tax code, the way that it's being calculated, the level of complication around it, that actually just, can we look to fix that? And I know it sort of impacts a relatively small cross-section of the population if you zoom out, but actually they are quite a vocal and politically active part of the population, and therefore I think it would be wise to sort that and also just reinstate this sense of fairness. I think the other thing we talked about before, and I disagree with Jeremy Hunt on almost everything, but I did see a thing recently where he talked about £100,000 isn't a huge salary considering everything that's going on, and I think there's truth in that. Everything has got more expensive. Now, I'm not saying the average wage in the UK is a lot smaller than that, and I'm not stuck up here in my ivory tower, believe me, talking about how 100k is, you can't get by on 100k. But I think if you zoom out and look at the wider point here, which is actually things have changed now, and the inefficiencies or the perverse outcomes you've talked about are starting to massively impact people in perverse ways. One of those is around childcare and the way the childcare system's designed. Now, I know there's changes coming down the line on that, but there's this idea that it's not worth somebody earning over £100,000 until they start hitting 150k, I think, because it's just not worth their while financially when it comes to A, how they'll be treated from a tax point of view, and B, also what they have to pay in terms of childcare, because childcare is so expensive in this country. So that surely nobody, whether you're Labour or Tory, are designing that into a system where it's just not worth anyone's while. And that, I think those inefficiencies are the things that really need to be looked at and addressed as, as part of any process of change that comes through, hopefully kickstarted by this election. So, I think fairness needs to return, or the idea of fairness. You can debate whether or not we should have a tax or which part of the population should be taxed. I have strong views on that, but actually the idea that it doesn't work is a really bad look. It's a really bad look.
Yeah, I think, the childcare thing in particular, because it's all the threshold. I mean, they have, like you said, they have done some stuff to try and fix it. Like, they moved the threshold up. And I think that the Tories, in fairness to them, and Jeremy Hunt, I think last week said that they were going to, and they had already announced this, but I think they gave a bit more detail on it. They said they were going to raise the threshold to £120,000 income, and they were going to make that actually per couple, because you have a situation at the moment where you can have a family where one person is a homemaker and earns zero, the other person is on £60,001 a year, and they, or actually no, because it's gone up now, but basically it's all predicated on one earner, and you can lose your child benefits based on what happens to one earner. So you can have a situation where you have two people earning £59,999 each, and they get full child benefits, and they earn a lot more than another household that's on 40 grand a year less. And that's, again, it's an unintended consequence of the system being designed poorly in the first place. Really interested to see what Labour have to say about childcare. They haven't really said very much. I'm sure
said much about anything, have they, Ed? That's the tactic, isn't it? Keep still.
We'll just let the government do the electioneering for you.
To be fair, Rishi's been doing a good job so far of handing it to him on a plate. But anyway, we won't get into that.
They haven't said much about it. I'm sure they're not going to start, withdrawing stuff that the current government has put in place. I think they'll probably, try and reform it more. But I think big part of the issue, and this, you are, a dad who, pays for childcare and has, childcare. I'm months away from that position because my wife's currently on maternity leave, but son's going to have to start going to childcare from September, where, there's all sorts of things that mean we have shortage of childcare. The way it's organised is absolutely mad. And just, the stuff I've learned going through the process of trying to set it up is just, it's like this doesn't work. And we don't even live in, we don't live in London, so we don't, childcare is not that expensive. Relative, I will say, it is, not cheap, but relative to what happens in, places like London and other kind of major cities, it's just mad, basically.
Yeah, no, listen, setting my stall out here, I'm happy, broadly speaking, to sort of pay tax so long as I feel like it's fair taxation and everything's working well and that we're all kind of getting the kind of services that we need. I think all political viewpoints of different stripes will agree that that's probably not been happening across a variety of different areas, and that things aren't working as well as they should be in, health, education, policing, all those kind of stuff. So there's other priorities, I'm sure, and I don't want to sit here and sort of complain about my own situation, which is fine, broadly speaking. But I think there is definitely a sense that once you come into this sort of cohort of being a parent and start speaking to other parents, that everybody's baffled by how we've got to this position, and that actually, if you are disincentivizing people for working or for having their careers or things like that, then you end up in a bit of a really bizarre situation, which is not good for anyone economically. It's not good for people themselves who've got their own careers and aspirations. It's not good for the wider economy because people become less active. And while obviously there's benefits to people staying at home with children and things like that, there's a socializing aspect to that as well, which we found really good with our daughter. I think the other thing that really kind of blows the mind a little bit is because of the cost of it. My wife works very hard as well, has her own kind of career and focuses on what she wants to do. And actually, for early part of my daughter's life, essentially a large part of her income is going to be put towards paying somebody to look after her child while she stays at work, which again just seems like the wrong way round. If we gave more support at the opening part of that, then actually maybe she might find herself in a more relaxed situation to be able to maintain her career. But the main reason she's doing that is because she wants a career as well as being able to sort of look after our daughters. So we have to work out that balance between ourselves and how we kind of make that work. But yeah, it's incredible. It's not, I'm not the first person to say this, but it's soul destroying for people who essentially feel like they're working from not much really in order to continue a situation that they feel isn't working that well for them anyway, or support system isn't working that well for them anyway. So, I mean, that's yet another thing. MAP pay and making sure that parents or paternity pay, making sure parents are able to make that work better for them is another thing that potentially we could look at. And the start of that is delivering efficient, well-designed childcare, I think. And there's definitely work to be done in that arena.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through this at the moment. This was the kind of the personal bit of the podcast that we were going to move on to, but we're like, Ellen's been on, my wife has been on maternity leave now for, goodness, since October, and she's very firmly on statutory pay at the moment. And we made a plan for that, and we saved to cover the kind of the cost, the bills, so we were okay kind of thing. But the next step is this: it's checking out the childcare options and how you deal with it. And then so Cosmo's, he's 7 or 8 months now. By September, he'll qualify for the free childcare, which is a new thing now from September. Over 9 months, they can have 15 hours free. And you hear 15 hours and you think, great, 15 hours. In my head, as somebody who works an 8-hour day, it's like, okay, so that's 2 days work, maybe, like, just under 7.5 hours per day. No, that's not how it works at all. Actually, 15 hours, you have to stretch it, because 15 hours is only term time, which is, for some reason, childcare functions on the same schedule as the school system, which I'm not quite sure how that works, but let's move on from that briskly. So actually, we only get 11 hours a week in practice, and the nursery counts 1 day a week as 11 hours. And it's like...
So that's the other variable here. Those nurseries have their own definitions as well.
I'm just getting exactly half of what I thought I was getting. I thought I was getting a couple of days here. No, I'm not. So we've ended up with a situation where, and then I didn't want to go back full time, because she obviously wants to spend time with him, and it is quite unusual for mothers to go back full time, even though we would be better off ultimately, because her job pays enough that she'll still bring in more money than she'd spend on childcare, which is the kind of mad calculations you end up sitting and trying to work out. But she's going back like 3 and 4 days a week. She's splitting her time, but we're now in a situation where we have to pay. We get 1 day a week for free, effectively, at the nursery, and we're paying for 2 days a week with a childminder. Now, childminder, you're lovely. We sorted her out, and you're not, I mean, as far as I understand, childcare goes, not that expensive kind of thing. It is a big cost for us, but we'll figure it out. But the thing that happened to us that was mad was we nailed down like a different childminder when Ellen was still pregnant. So this is like April last year. We were like, okay, there's obviously a lot of demand. We want to make sure we get a childminder sorted, blah, blah. So we were really organised about it. We got it sorted out. Beginning of this year, this childminder who we'd agreed, we hadn't put a deposit down or anything, but we had an agreement that she was going to take him on, called us up and said, look, I'm really sorry, but because of the changes to the government's childcare hours, I'm going to have to drop you. And we were like, okay. And what had happened, because of the childcare hours extension, so the government dished out lots more free hours to parents. What she had done is absorbed a load more hours from her existing clients, and meant she had no space for new clients. And this again kind of brings us back to perverse outcomes. You could hand out more stuff for free, but if you're increasing demand, and it's like, you could say this about so many things. You could say it about NHS, you could say it about property market, everything. You dole out more free stuff, you have to have more of the free stuff to give away. And it's just, I don't know. Sorry, I've ended up back.
No, that's good. That's good.
No, again.
That's good. It's good to come full circle on it. But no, just a sense of the hope is that this election will be the starting gun of fixing this. And, it looks like we're going to get a Labour government. And, while they've been light on detail, maybe some fresh perspectives, new personalities, new ideas might help to bring some clarity to this. But we do need, there's so much inefficiency everywhere you look that you just feel like someone does need to get a grip of all of this and sit down. And while there'll always be unintended consequence, we know this from sort of working in finance and financial regulation, I can often do this, come in with the best will in the world and create unintended outcomes further down the line. It can't be happening with every single policy that you produce, and it can't be to the detriment of the people who are using the end of the policy, or using the services provided by the policy. There needs to be more coherent, well thought out thinking, and listening to the feedback from the people who it impacts in order to make that work. Hopefully they've done that when we eventually get to see their manifestos, which we're still waiting on. But once we get through those, we might see that they might have a bit more of a coherent plan on this stuff, and we can start getting into the detail on it. But fighting a war on perverse outcomes or unintended consequences, I think, is a good place to start certainly on the personal finance side of things, because there's just too much of that going on at the moment, and we're all finding ourselves doing this crazy mental gymnastics to try and make things work, which it is not a good place to be. We've got enough to do with our day jobs and bringing up kids and doing whatever else.
Exactly.
So
100%. Right, I think that brings us nice and neatly to concluding. We'll obviously be back again with another Buyers episode every week now on a Monday, and you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, and watch us on YouTube, and of course catch everything else on Mouthy Money, on the Mouthy Money website and social media channels. So Chris, thank you again.
Thank you, Ed.
And we'll catch you all again. Thank you for listening or watching. Cheers.
See you soon.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.